guys, how's everyone doing today? Well, I'm going to do a video. I've got a couple of subjects I want to talk about, but first I want to mention something. I've seen a couple of people in the comments asking me if I had a PayPal to donate for a coffee. I had to think about this, and I kind of feel weird taking money from anybody due to the cost of living crisis at the moment. It just wouldn't feel right. I'd feel horrible. People are struggling as it is at the moment, so I don't expect you guys to buy me coffees or want to give me money or anything like this. I do this because I enjoy it, and although it's extremely kind and flattering, and obviously, in these times, the money would be great, but also that money would also be great for that other person to keep it in their own bank, in their own pocket. So I just wouldn't feel right asking you for donations. I wouldn't feel right to anyone offering to pay me for a coffee or anything like that. Just see yourselves okay during this really hard and difficult time. Make sure yourselves are okay, and you've got a little bit extra money in your bank accounts, because as we know, inflation's went through the roof, and the cost of living is just going to get worse and worse. Gas, everything, food, everything is just costing so much money at this moment, and it would just feel wrong. And I love you guys for offering, but yeah, I would rather that you kept that money to yourselves and saw yourselves okay. But thank you so much for offering. That really is it's so kind of you to do so. So I want to start the video by talking about the grooming gangs, and then I want to move on to the immigration crisis that the UK is facing, as is, we all know, the United States. But I'm going to mainly stick to the UK and maybe add a few other countries in there. Then I also want to talk about, but I don't know if I'll do it in this video, all the money that the UK and other countries are sending to the Ukraine during a cost of living crisis, while people can't afford to feed their families, heat their homes, put gas to petrol in their cars. But that might take a while, because I also want to look into the wealth of the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky. I want to look into the corruption that was prevalent in that country, aka the Hunter Biden situation. But I think that's going to take quite a long video to do that. So I might do that in a separate video. So I'm going to start off with the grooming gangs, and I've got some clips from the news that I want to talk about and show you just how bad this is. It's gotten to an industrial scale of this happening now in the UK. In one town alone, 1,400 girls were trafficked, groomed and raped by these gangs, and it's not been mentioned in the media. People aren't calling it out because of who is involved in this, and it is predominantly Pakistani Muslims, with some Somali Muslims and North African Muslims in there, and that's who's doing this. And all the victims are British white girls, and it's just got to a level now where enough is enough. People are too scared to speak about this because you're labelled a racist if you do. But this isn't about race. If this was a white people doing this, I would still call them out. I would still say you're disgusting, evil men. So race has nothing to do with this. Absolutely nothing. The victims are what should matter in this case. The victims. So I'm going to start off with some news clips to let you with GB News, which seems to be the only news source covering this at the moment, which is bloody ridiculous.
Exploitation of children was so rife, it became the norm.
Infamous for years of child abuse. Sexual exploitation has become a fact of life.
They trafficked, raped or sexually abused girls.
There were stories of the most horrific abuse, rape, violence, exploitation perpetrated against children on an almost industrial scale. Horror at the crimes, matched by outrage at the persistent failures of police and the authorities. Lessons would be learnt, of course, and yet still today, damning evidence of yet more failure. At the inquiry, she was known as Witness CSA12. But Fiona Goddard has waived her anonymity to speak about 5 long years of rape and abuse and the many opportunities missed.
Most of it's just a blur of being abused and beaten and fighting. When I think back to it, there were a lot of times stood at my window crying, wondering how I could get away and trying to take my own life as well. That became a regular thing back when I was about 15, 16.
And the men just came for you every day?
Near enough every day, about at least 6 days a week, yeah. If you said no, you got beaten up, or you got taken out to the middle of the moors and dumped in the moors and stuff.
She says care home staff and police were well aware she was being exploited. And then when a child is clearly being abused and may say that she's being abused and nothing is done, what does that do to that child?
It crushes you. It makes you feel completely alone, and it makes you believe that you are the wrong person. You have to be prosecuting them and you have to be chasing it down to be able to limit the destruction it leaves.
9 men were sentenced to a total of 132 years in jail.
This problem is so bad in the UK at the moment. There's tons of towns. I'm going to flash up on the screen just some of the areas where it's been affected and show you the mugshots and the scale of what is going on. And still to this day, it's happening. Still to this bloody day. These grooming gangs, these men that are predominantly, as I said, Pakistani, Somali, North African Muslims, are still involved, yet the police and authorities don't want to do anything or are sweeping things under the rug because they don't want to be labelled racist. Now, I have a clip here from presenter Maggie Nawaz, and he's a Pakistani Muslim who's calling this out for what it actually is. It's an industrial scale rape farm factory. And that's exactly what it is. And I'm going to play a clip from him, and he's confronting a caller who actually called in. And listen to what he says.
To hear some of the things that you're saying, and I don't think anyone would agree with any of it. What I was just trying to ascertain and understand where you come from, you're throwing a lot of statistics, and I was trying to follow the numbers, right? Yep. You were saying, first you said that, obviously, this is specifically to one case, which is in Rotherham, and obviously we know it's been in the news how many times, and you said 87% of 84% of the people who got prosecuted are of Southeast Asian, and then you kept mentioning Muslims, which I understand. I'm an Asian Muslim, so I have nothing against that. But then you started mentioning the population of this country, yep, and then saying there are 3% Muslims and things like that. But which I think, what you're comparing apples and pears, because this is one specific case to one specific area within England, which is in Rotherham, okay? And the people that were prosecuted or have been prosecuted or are still being investigated in that specific case or in the Rotherham, which is, mind you know as well as I do, highly populated. A majority of the people there are Asian or Southeast Asian anyway. It's not the same as Essex or London or Cornwall. So obviously, then when you're mentioning national statistics, I think you're comparing apples and pears. Because you said nationally there are 3% Muslims.
Okay, Daniel,
right?
let me respond to what you said. I got your point. Let me respond to it because I think there's an issue here, understandably so, of shock and denial. And I just need you to be aware of something that you may not be aware of. Because I started this conversation all those years ago in a similar level of shock and denial. Unfortunately for your argument, it's not just Rotherham. Yes, in Rotherham, this has been, it's the most famous one, or infamous one, because it was the first one to be exposed. In 2014, an inquiry found in Rotherham there were more than 1,400 victims, 1,400 victims of grooming and sexual exploitation between 97 and 2013. That's just in one town. But it gets worse, Daniel. Then it happened in Rochdale. And then in Rochdale, they found that basically sentences were given up to 19 years because of crimes committed against girls between the age of 13 and 15 in and around Rochdale between 2008 and 2010. Then there was a case in Oxford in 2013 where 5 Muslim men were convicted and handed sentences at the Old Bailey for exploiting girls between 11 and 15. All of the men were of Pakistani origin, except for 2 who were North African, also Muslim. Then it was in Bristol, where 13 Somali Muslim men were jailed for more than a total of 100 years after they were convicted in 2014 of running an inner-city sex ring. Then in Aylesbury, 6 South Asian men were jailed in 2015. For grooming underage white girls between 2006 and 2012. Then, in Peterborough, a total of 10 men were convicted of child sex crimes in the town. And the boss, Muhammad Qubaib, who was originally from Pakistan, he was jailed for 13 years at the Old Bailey after he was found guilty of forcing a 14-year-old girl to perform a sex act on him. And then Newcastle, and Daniel, you know what? It's too depressing to carry on. It goes on and on. One second, Daniel. The pattern in all of these, overwhelmingly, is South Asian Muslim men, primarily Pakistani, sometimes Somali Muslims, sometimes North African Muslims. It doesn't help us, Daniel, to pretend this wasn't a phenomenon that was replicated across the country. What I would advise you said you're a South Asian Muslim man, therefore your name probably is Daniel or something other than Daniel. I would advise you to address this topic head on and not pretend it's not a national phenomenon, because I guarantee you that anger will rise if you come on radio and pretend this is not a national problem.
I'm not here pretending in any way, buddy. I'm not here pretending in any way. I just wanted to make sure, and the statistics that you showed me is right. But at the same time, okay, the pockets and areas that you suggested, okay, if you follow national statistics in regards to the paedophilia gang, nationally, when I'm talking Great Britain, not just England, right? Great Britain, right? The biggest problem that we have paedophilia, and it's been spotted, and it comes in small patterns, and then it goes away and fades away, right? Which is basically mentioning the Catholic Church, which is mentioning basically the Pope himself who raised these problems, okay? Where it's not just 15 girls there, 20 girls there.
Daniel, you're doing the same thing again, because you said, I'm not denying these facts, but, and then your but.
No,
hold on, Daniel, your but was followed by a whole bunch of Buttistan, right? And let's not Buttistan this topic. I said and made very clear, if the majority of country is white, then it's natural to see the majority of representation in any crime to be by white people, because we're living in a majority white country. What is concerning is if pockets of our country, communities like ours, Daniel, yours and mine, are disproportionately involved in any one type of crime. That disproportionate number raises questions about our attitudes, our meaning British Pakistani men, our attitudes towards the rest of society, and whether we have a Muslim supremacist attitude. One of the defendants in this case, Daniel, I'm sorry you're not going to like hearing this stuff, but the truth doesn't necessarily care about your feelings. One of the main defendants in trial argued that it's his religious right to have sex with underage girls, and that was his defense. Look it up, Daniel. It is unbelievable. And you and I know that kind of argument gets bandied about. You and I know, and if you don't believe me, again, look it up, that in Pakistan, you're in my country of origin, where our parents are from, when they tried to raise the age of sexual consent, it was shot down by the Ideological Council of Guarding Islamic Culture in Pakistan, shot down in Parliament and deemed blasphemous for trying to raise the age of consent. Because religion gets involved, culture gets involved. We've got to be able to have this conversation without being in denial, Daniel.
Oh, no, I'm not in denial in any way. And
you
I
sound
appreciate
like you
everything
are.
You're saying.
Yeah.
No. But we're going to, the way in which way I think these guys should be treated, I can't even say on the radio, because I've got 2 kids, and one's a girl and one's a boy, right? So I would never, and I'm condemning it 100%. It shouldn't be allowed in even 1%. There should be no statistics where this is allowed. Yeah. But I'm just saying the way you were portraying the conversation, the way you were pronouncing the statistics, the amount of times that you mentioned Muslim Pakistani men.
That's who's involved in it. That's the truth. I'm sorry, the statistics don't give a damn about your feelings, Daniel.
I'm not hurt.
Well, you sound hurt. You sound defensive.
No, I'm not hurt.
You know what you should have done, Dan? You know what you should have done? I really wish, because you said you're a Pakistani man, I really wish, for goodness sake, after the appeal I put out on the radio, I wish you'd called up and your first thought had been about these underage young white girls, the victims, I wish the first thing you did is call up this radio and say how disgusting to do this to these underage young victims. Instead, you want to obfuscate and talk to me about how I'm, giving statistics that you don't like. And it's just, this is what frustrates me, Daniel. Why was that your first reaction to the topic instead of thinking of the girls? And that's why I think it's about time that we just stop pretending this isn't a problem and address it head on, recognise there is this disproportionate problem within our communities and worry about the victims before we worry about you and me, Daniel. We're Pakistani men. We can look after ourselves. Those young girls couldn't.
And Majid is absolutely right. If you're living in a predominantly white country where the vast majority of the population is white, you would expect to see crimes, large numbers of crimes that committed would be by white people. But what he's saying is that these crimes are predominantly committed by the Pakistani, Somali, North African Muslim community, and that's what he's calling out, and I think he's an absolute hero for doing that. I've got some more clips that I want to show you.
This scandal involving 27 cities with probably thousands of underage young girls, it must lead to a Stephen Lawrence-style national inquiry looking into what the institutional failures have been. Just as was done with racism, and it was recognised that there were failures up and down the institutions of this country, and eventually it was recognised that the police forces were deemed institutionally racist. Well, here, the majority of these girls were in care homes, and therefore were let down by these care homes. One girl was impregnated twice before the age of 15 in her care home because an adult predator was allowed into their care home to statutorily rape her. Eventually found dead from a heroin overdose. There has been failures on an institutional level in the care homes up and down this country. There have been failures on an institutional level in the police up and down this country. And there have been failures on an institutional level in local Labour councils, probably not only Labour, but mainly Labour councils up and down this country because people have been scared of being called racist. And if the Macpherson inquiry led to the coining of the phrase institutional racism in this country, then this grooming gang scandal must be investigated on a national level in the same way, because this is institutional misogyny. And if there's a word for child hatred, that's what this is. And the fear of racism, or the fear of so-called Islamophobia, which is a misnomer, the fear, more appropriately, of anti-Muslim bigotry, must never be an excuse to allow underage girls to be raped and abused in this way. But it was. Think of that. Imagine that. 27 cities. And counting. Because I can guarantee you we haven't heard the end of this yet. Imagine the thousands of victims. Imagine the impunity with which these men must have been acting. Some of the girls as young as 11. One girl, if my memory serves me correctly, it was in Oxford. One girl was even branded by her raper as property of, and then his name on her leg. And I think, if memory serves me correctly, that girl was 11 years old. It is an absolute disgrace that this has been allowed to go on in this country. And you may hear me being angry right now. If you're not going to be angry about this, what on earth are you going to get angry about? People have cared for their reputations over the safety of children in this country being raped and drugged and passed around like meat, because of the bigotry and the prejudices of these Pakistani Muslim men who were looking down on these children as less than, as inferior, as some form of infidel that doesn't deserve honour or dignity. And I say that because if you want to, and I address you now here, oh woke left wing, you talk about believing the victim. Look it up. Go to your smartphone and Google Ella Hill. She writes a piece in The Independent in which, and she's a survivor of this form of grooming gang child sexual exploitation. And she writes a column in which she describes the religious extremist terminology her abusers were using as they were sexually exploiting her as a child. In which she talks of how they called her an infidel and how they abused her race and her lack of Islamic faith, and justified treating her in this way because they viewed her as less than, because they believed themselves to be Muslim supremacists. Don't tell me that their Muslim identity had nothing to do with this. I have lived and breathed this community all of my life. I can guarantee you that it's not the cause, but a factor in the way in which these girls was treated was the culture of these men, and as part of that culture is their religious attitude towards non-Muslims. And that is the reason that you see almost exclusively that they are men like me, Pakistani, British, Muslim. Most of them. Some of them Bangladeshi Muslims. Some of them Indian Muslims. Some of them North African Muslims. Some of them Somali Muslims. All of them Muslims. Almost all Pakistani Muslims. And the victims, almost all underaged white girls. Now, who will lead, who will defend the voiceless in this national scandal? Who will lead the case for saying we need a national inquiry into how this would have been tolerated for so long in any other crime? And even, yes, the murder of that one man, Stephen Lawrence, which set off, and rightfully so, a huge national debate around institutional racism in this country. In any other case, you first get through the phase of being able to talk about it. Then you get to justice, where you convict the perpetrators. Then you start looking at those who covered up for the perpetrators. And that's what the Macpherson inquiry did in the case of Stephen Lawrence. And it deemed the police institutionally racist. Well, I ask you now, we've started to convict people. Yes, I listed those 27 cities for you, which is bad enough as it is. But where's the accountability for the police who covered this up? Where's the accountability for the Labour councils who covered this up? Where's the compensation for the victims? Because the police deliberately shelved investigations into their statutory rape because they wanted to be politically correct. Ella Hill and all the other victims deserve compensation. Where are the accolades for Anne Cryer MP, former Labour MP in Keighley, who raised this years and years ago, was a sole voice, crying out into the wilderness, beseeching people to listen to her, pleading with people not to deem her racist, that she was a Labour MP. Racism was the furthest thing from her mind. She was ignored. Then came Julie Bindel, the first to write columns about this. Ignored. In fact, she writes herself that in 2007 she was looking into this and her pieces were shelved. Editors didn't want to run her pieces because they feared being accused of being racist. And then, of course, the Times picked it up and Anthony Lloyd won an award for his award-winning investigation into this, which kicked off the national debate. But look how Sarah Champion was treated. Labour frontbencher who was sacked because she said this was a problem. And now, finally, the independent police watchdog has said, yes, it was covered up by the police. Well, that's not good enough. We need a statutory inquiry, just like there was done with Stephen Lawrence, a statutory inquiry to investigate what exactly went wrong and how this will be avoided in the future. Because there have been clear failures in the care system. There have been clear failures in the local councils. And obviously, now they've admitted it, clear failures in the police forces. And also, I would say, let's go further. Don't just convict these men. Look at the communities. Where are the clear failures in the communities themselves?
So that was another clip by Majid, who is clearly outraged by this, as we all should be. This isn't about racism. This is about men who are committing disgusting acts and getting away with it, and victims who are being blamed. The victims are literally being blamed that it was that and made to feel like this was their fault. Now I have some more clips, and then I also have such a bloody disturbing clip from one of the brothers of these perpetrators who gave an interview. Now, these men who have been caught and sentenced and it's not technically long sentences they're doing, but they're using loopholes in the law to get out of being deported back to their own country. They're actually giving up their Pakistani citizenship. So they're giving up their dual citizenship so they're not deported. So they're technically only British citizens now. So therefore they can't be deported because they're now technically Brits. So they're using a very clever loophole in the law to get out of being deported, which is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. One guy who's doing this raped an 11-year-old girl and got her pregnant. So now he's I think he's out of prison now. Him and 3 others who were due to be deported back to Pakistan, they used this legal loophole, and now this poor bloody girl has got to live in the same town as this monster. And you know what his excuse was for wanting to stay? That he wants to be a good role model for his son. Are you having a bloody laugh? A good role model for your son when you're doing that to an 11-year-old child? And most of them are using it's the religious right, as you heard Majid saying. Some of them are using it's their religious right to do this. This isn't a Sharia law country. It isn't. And if you come and live here, you've got to follow our laws. And our laws explicitly state that you cannot abuse children. So I'm going to show you some more clips now.
Convicted of an offence carrying more than 12 months imprisonment is subject to automatic deportation. However, that's subject to their human rights and protection under the European Convention on Human Rights. So everyone has a right to the respect for private and family life, protected by the Convention. So the courts, when considering deporting someone, have to take into account that individual's human rights on their individual cases. So where they have children in this country, or where they've got a partner, or a long length of time living here, that has to be taken into account. Now, there's a balancing exercise. The more serious the offence, the balance shifts in favour of the state. So any sentence of more than 4 years, that balance shifts in favour of the state, protecting the public.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't work like that in practice, that you can argue, because we spoke yesterday about one of the criminals, convicted sex offender. He got a 13-year-old girl pregnant. He is appealing he has been trying to appeal his deportation for years. He's been quite successful. It's looking likely that he will be successful. He was in prison for more than 4 years, and he's basically said, look, my sons need me in this country. I want to be a role model for them. Oh. Can you see how people will say, well, how can it be possible that this man who's impregnated a 13-year-old girl has served his sentence for those crimes, clearly not an upstanding member of society? How can it be that he's even allowed to, for years and years, be allowed to stay in this country and fight his deportation?
Well, you can't blame Mr. Aziz, you're talking about using the law in his favour. That's his right and his lawyers to do that. This is the thing, though, that the Home Office have decided that they can't deport him. And the reason is Mr. Aziz has revoked his Pakistani nationality. Therefore, you can only deport somebody to a country where they can be sent to. Now, at the moment, he doesn't hold Pakistani nationality. He could re-accept it if he wanted to. Obviously, it won't be in his interest to do that, because in doing so, he'll be sent on the next plane back to Pakistan.
These men are not stupid. They're not stupid, and they're using these legal loopholes, and the lawyers that are defending these scumbags understand everyone's entitled to legal representation. But do you really want these scumbags living in our country?
Now remember the appalling cases 10 years ago, and Rochdale was one of those northern towns afflicted. Grooming gangs, underage girls sexually abused on pretty much an industrial scale. Luckily, in the end, the forces of the law did work, having been much criticised to begin with for perhaps turning a blind eye to something that was going on for fear of being thought racist. And the problem was even more acute because so many of the men involved were people from Pakistan, and that made talking about it even more difficult. But yesterday, an immigration tribunal ruled that 2 of the men heavily involved in the trafficking and sexual exploitation of young girls, 2 of them who due to be deported will now not be deported because it would infringe their human rights if they're sent back to Pakistan. No matter about the human rights of the girls, the young girls that lived in Rochdale, it is because we are still signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights. I think the whole thing is pretty appalling. And joining me is Maggie Oliver, best known for being a former detective constable in the Greater Manchester Police and for exposing the Rochdale child grooming scandal. Maggie, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for having me on.
Well, not at all, and well done you for the work you did, the brave work you did in exposing all of this, and I suppose getting convictions in court, putting these men in prison was part of your success story. But how do you feel, given that the Home Secretary at the time, Theresa May, said very clearly these people should be deported, and now, after lengthy legal battles, they're going to be allowed to stay? How does that make you feel?
I don't see this case as a success on any level, from the charges to the convictions to the time spent in prison to this latest fiasco. And actually, my understanding, Nigel, is that the 2 men have not had a decision. But what has happened is that one of the 3 who was ordered to be deported he accessed a legal loophole. So 5 days before this got to court, he reneged on his Pakistani citizenship, and so for 4 years, the Home Secretary and Sajid Javid have known that he was not going to be deported. That has only just come to light, and the other 2 abusers who are fighting deportation have argued that because he isn't being deported, nor should they be. And the other thing that makes me so angry is that one of the abusers, Adil Khan, who got a 13-year-old child pregnant where we had a fetus and DNA, he's got the cheek to even say that he's entitled to a family life, that his son deserves a role model. The whole system is broken.
That's unbelievable.
It's shocking. It just, this case exposes time and time again the failures in our criminal justice system. And, my take on it is that these men gave up their human rights when they did what they did. Where are the human rights of the victims? What about the children who walk around, they're young women now, walk around Rochdale every day in danger of coming face to face with their abusers? Where are their human rights? And our whole system is flawed. There is no equality. It is not balanced.
Well,
it is all, weighted in favour of the abusers, who, for me, should not even be walking the streets.
No, listen, you've said that with great passion and great feeling, and I absolutely understand why, and I'm sure everyone watching and listening to that feels very much as you do. But the heart of the matter, and the reason we have protracted, lengthy battles when it comes to deporting foreign criminals, when it comes to deporting terrorists, when it comes to deporting those who come to this country with no rightful claim across the English Channel by small boat, is because we're signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights. We've written it into UK law with the Human Rights Act. And it really means that the police and the courts in the end go round in circles for year after year. Is it time we left ECHR? Is it time we actually dealt with just British law without that interference?
You know what, Nigel? I feel, after my journey the last 10 years, I have seen corruption at the highest level. And I have seen how, you only look at this case time and time again. I do believe that innocent people do need some protection from the authorities that would otherwise trample all over them. But what I would also say is that these men have had millions in legal aid. We should be using our system to protect those who need protecting. I don't think the issue here is human rights. I think the issue here is that very clever lawyers find a loophole and exploit that at the expense of victims. Anybody in this country listening to what we're saying now would feel that this is not a human right. This is actually not right. It comes down to right and wrong, and there are some things that are so wrong that Human Rights Act or not, they are wrong. These men were released from prison on parole. They never showed any remorse. The system should not have released them.
To hear that our tax money is funding the lawyers for these scumbags, millions of pounds in legal aid they've had, millions of pounds, and they show absolutely no remorse. I'm going to show you a video of one of their brothers, one of these men's brothers, who gave an interview, and just listen to this scumbag, this absolute piece of shit, this dirty low down bastard.
You ever asked Ash if he had sex with underage girls?
I have. My father has. All my family has. He's not like that. All they've created for yourselves and the newspapers is Ash to be a monster. He is not a monster.
From your perspective,
okay,
what happened in Rotherham?
Well, it's like anything else, to be quite fair with you. People get accused day in, day out of allegations get made. Like I said to you before, I can't sit here and call you a prostitute for a simple reason is that's just an allegation. I haven't actually seen you do anything, and I also haven't got any proof.
Do you think all 1,400 of those girls were lying?
No, I didn't say that. Biggest part of the problem you have these days is these young girls that are dressed up, i.e. mini skirts, stuff like that, and they're going into the clubs. And they're ending up going with blokes and stuff like that. They're waking up next morning and they scream, rape. Or groomed.
Some of these girls were just 12 and
that's
in children's homes.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be hard pushed to see any of them as 16.
Yeah, I agree with you on that case, but that is really, really, really sick if girls young as 12 are saying they've been groomed. And I can't say if they have been groomed or they haven't been groomed, but if anyone's to blame on that scenario is the social workers. If they're going to accuse somebody, for example, a 12-year-old girl's accused my brother Arshad, yeah? Prime example I've just give you. If someone's accused him of that, it's not Arshad to blame. It's the social services to let her out at a time like that.
And this is how he equates sex with underage girls.
It's like going and eating that dog crap. They wouldn't do it. If I said to you, right, go outside and pick that dog crap up and eat it, you're not gonna eat it, are you? Unless you're cracked up. You know, we forbid that stuff.
Do you believe this creep? So he's saying like if a 12-year-old accused his grown adult brother of doing a heinous crime like rape, it's not him to blame. No, it's the social worker and the child. Piece of shit. Absolute piece of shit. And to make this even more ironic, this guy who just had the interview was also arrested not long after because he was also involved in the grooming and rape of children. Piece of shit.
It makes me very angry personally that we keep going round and round this same rabbit hole. But on behalf of the victims who are caught up in this case again, it fills me with despair really that they need to come to an organisation like the Maggie Oliver Foundation in order to be supported in their battle to be heard. We were approached well over a year ago, initially by one of the victims in this case. We're now aware of 7. And they have been seeing this case on the verge of being dropped for a while. But we've supported them and we've tried to get their voices heard by Humberside Police without any joy. We approached Operation Hydrant, but we've seen lots of evidence, and I believe that other independent experts have now viewed the evidence. We feel that there's a lot of corroboration for these victims. They were children, very, very young children, and when the authorities are dismissing them and fobbing them off. It's a sadly familiar story to me, Colin. You know, even with Op Augusta, which I worked on in 2005, for 15 years, Greater Manchester Police insisted that there was no evidence of abuse of those children. It took 15 years and a lot of energy and a lot of fighting to get GMP to be forced to reopen that case. And, you know, these are cases that we see time and time again. Even right now, we've got, you know, the MP for Keighley, Robbie Moore. He's trying to get cases in and around Keighley looked at. We've got all the publicity in the media about Rotherham. You know, they are very, I accept that they are very difficult cases to investigate. But when you consider that there are less than 2% of cases of rape again or abuse against women and girls, that even reported cases that make it to court, you have to question whether the authorities are only taking the absolutely easiest cases forward, and in that process are failing 98 out of every 100 victims. We see it repeatedly in the foundation. Virtually every day we're approached by another victim who tells us the same thing, that they're not being listened to, that they're being fobbed off, and we try and support them to be heard.
This is absolutely disgraceful, and it's time that the police, the government, have to take a stance and stop this, because this is bullshit. Young girls are being groomed and raped, and this is still going on. And the police need to take race completely out of this, because it doesn't matter if this was a white person, a black person, a brown person, a pink person, a green person. I don't care. You don't abuse children at all. And the fact that it's getting swept under the rug because authorities are too scared of being labelled racist is bullshit. The victims need to come first here. They absolutely need to. And it doesn't matter what colour the person is that done this crime. They have to pay for it. So I'm going to leave this here. As I said, this is getting long. I was going to put the immigration problem into this video, so I'm going to make a part 2 on that. Because this is just, we're at 40 minutes now. I had so much more, I could add so much more information into this video, but this gives you an idea of how rife and prevalent this is in the UK at the moment. It's absolutely disgusting. Disgusting. So as I said, I'll do a part 2 on immigration and our immigration problems. So I'll be back later, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And please hit the like button. I don't know how to say this. And please hit the subscribe button. And I'll be back later. Love y'all. Bye.